What do I need to do for AOC to do a 3-hour interview with me? Ezra, from your throne of wisdom.
I don't think I know how you get AOC herself to do it. I would not pretend to know her offices or her particular views on this. I do think, though, that you can see different Democrats taking on different kinds of risks. Right now, we're sort of in the age of Gavin Newsom starting a podcast. I mean, Gavin Newsom is the governor of California, and he's spending some percentage of his time doing a podcast with Charlie Cook and Michael Savage and Steve Bannon. Gavin Newsom realizes that one lane for a Democrat is to be high risk and talking to virtually everybody. I think Pete Buttigieg, in a different way, is somebody who wants to take media risks. Now, I think my gut on him is he's going to hold his powder a little bit. So he'll probably want to do the Lex Fridman podcast, assuming he runs in 2028, in 2027. Buttigieg, right. I think a lot of them are trying to figure out what is the lane for right now. And there's a lane for the next 2 years, and there's a lane for the 2 years after that. And you're going to see a lot of people begin to blanket media in the 2 years after that. Now, it'd be interesting. I would be curious to know, would Hakeem Jeffries come on to do your show right now? That'd be interesting. I mean, would he do it for 4 hours? I don't know. The 4 hour ask, the 3 to 4 hour ask, as somebody who also books politicians, is hard. I have trouble. I like to book people for 90 minutes to 2 hours. And I tend to get negotiated down to, I try not to go under 75 or 65. But even as somebody I think well regarded in that world, it's very, very, very hard for me to get politicians to sit for 2 hours.
I don't have the sense that the 3-hour ask is a big ask because of scheduling. I think it still is grounded in the fear of saying the wrong thing.
I just think they're used to something else, right? I think that when you talk, I mean, they are scheduled by schedulers, right? If you talk to them yourself, if you end up having a personal relationship with Wes Moore of Maryland, and he wants to do your show, he will tell his scheduler, I want 3 to 4 hours to do the show. Yeah. But the scheduler is used to a world. The staff is used to a world where nobody gets 3 to 4 hours for the boss. Yeah. Reporters don't. Donors don't. Yeah. Policy staffers don't. So then when some interview comes in and they say, hey, I want 3 to 4 hours, the answer is no, because culturally it's not done. You need Donald Trump himself, Pete Buttigieg himself, AOC herself to say to their staff, no, we're making time for this.
Right.
Because it's not how they make time for things normally. I don't know how much it is fear. I do think they're unused to it, but I suspect a lot of it is simply booking culture. Like I run into it too. They're not used to saying yes to 3 to 4 hours for anything. It's not that they don't have it. They have 3 to 4 hours if their kid is having a graduation, right? I mean, they're human beings. They can make time, but it would have to come in a way from them. My sense is this was part of the Rogan. It's very unclear because there are very differing stories on what happened in the Rogan-Harris negotiations, but it does seem that time was one of the sticking points.
It's also possible that you're going to find, as you try to interview Democratic politicians, that the exact same thing that happened with tech CEOs is going to happen among Democratic politicians. You interviewed some tech CEOs, and then they did a great job. And their friends were like, you were fantastic on the Lex Fridman podcast. That was such a great thing that you said in, minute 97. And then there becomes a bit of a meme that you can create really high value moments for yourself if you appear on Lex's podcast. And then it becomes less risky for the next marginal CEO to say yes. And I think right now, what we're talking about fundamentally is not physics, it's culture. It's just norms. I think there's a fear of low expected value if you're a high-ranking Democratic politician and maybe you do a podcast like this. What if I say the wrong thing and it goes viral and my bookers and my agenda people and myself just feel terrible for the next few weeks because all we see on Blue Sky and X is just people hating. But if you get one interview that goes well, if you talk to Wes Moore, let's say, and there's a 5-minute segment where he articulates some vision of liberalism in the 2020s that everyone says, my gosh, that is the best possible articulation of what the Democratic Party can stand for the next 4 years that I've ever heard. Suddenly what's happened is that appearing on the show becomes massively de-risked. And in fact, the risk valence entirely switches. We are leaving dollars on the floor by not appearing on this guy's podcast because I'm AOC. I'm a sensational communicator. If Wes Moore can do it, I can do it even better. And so I think to a certain extent, there's a little bit like of a riot theory phenomenon here. The person who throws the first stone in a riot has to be very courageous. The person who throws the 100th and first stone in a riot doesn't need to be courageous at all. And there might be a little bit of that going on, that people need to see proof of high expected value before it breaks what we're acknowledging to be a bit of a communications norm on the left.
That's a really convincing and powerful theory. I think I want to push back on it because so what's going to happen? For example, this very conversation, you're both going to come off brilliant.
Well,
Okay.
we're barely like 50 minutes into a 4
Yeah,
hour.
it's gonna
Let's
be-
see
I
what
have
happens.
no
Okay,
more
yeah,
material,
right.
Lex. It's
Exactly.
all straight downhill.
But what people
Gonna
will
get tired.
they'll listen to
It's
this
sloppy.
and they're like, well, that's Ezra. Like, he's brilliant. They're going to be worried about their own candidate. If AOC comes off brilliant, they're not going to be thinking, oh, this is a place to be brilliant. They're going to be like, well, that's because AOC is brilliant, but my candidate is not. It still boils down to the caution. I've had a lot of high-profile Republican people reach out to me. They don't give a shit. They're just like, whatever, I'll come. People on the left, I've had two people who I respect deeply and admire express caution about the previous people I've interviewed and not wanting to come on.
Well, that's a thing the left has to get over.
Yeah, like what?
That's a very important cultural. They began to do a thing where spaces were verboten because it had platformed so and so. And I think that culture is changing. I think they realize, that they abandoned huge, vast swaths of significant culture because like they wouldn't go places. It's crazy. Like the idea that you only go where people agree with you is genuine lunacy. I don't want to act as your booker here. And 2020 candidates are what they are, and they each have their own press strategy. But I would say, like, I'm doing this myself on my show. I don't think the best people to get right now in the Democratic Party are the 7 people who lead the polls. Like, I'm looking for people who will think out loud. Like, I just had Jake Auchincloss on. He's like a not that well-known House member from Massachusetts. I just think he's a guy who thinks out loud. I am booking someone else right now like that. I have 2 more people like that, frankly, who are neither of them. They're like I could get like a bigger name. I'm more interested in people who are thinking. Like, one reason I think Bernie Sanders always did everything is, to him, the thing he was really doing was he had something to say. The point of almost everything for Bernie Sanders is to be in a place where people can hear the thing he has to say. And a lot of politicians don't have that, right? The point of anything is what it does for them in the polls, what it does for them with the donors, how it repositions them. I'm interested right now at this moment because it's not 2028. It's not 2027. There's no Democratic primary happening right now. The idea that you're going to like pre-run the Democratic Party is stupid, or primary is stupid. We don't even know what we might be in World War III, right? We have no idea what, we might have, AGI. Like, the things that the 2027 primary might be about, the kinds of scandals that might have erupted by them are totally different. Whereas, the reason I have people on is because they are saying something. They're a live mind in the moment that has a perspective on this that you want to hear. And so I would look for that. And I think a lot of people who are not, there are people who are trying to protect something, protect a standing in the polls, protect a sort of coalitional set of allies they currently have. And then there are people who are, trying to just be heard. Again, a lot of Bernie Sanders' culture, the way he does media, is now Bernie Sanders is Bernie Sanders. He didn't used to be. He wasn't in 2015 even. Like, when Bernie Sanders ran for president in 2015, it wasn't initially a big deal. It was like, oh, bummer, Elizabeth Warren didn't run for president, was a feeling of most people on the left. And so Bernie Sanders was a guy who's been saying the same thing for decades, but in the wilderness and nobody was listening.
Yeah.
And now he still has the instincts of somebody who understood that, like, the most important thing was to find a place where people were listening, where they would let you talk, and even better, let you talk for a while. I think the candidate who's going to do well in 2028 is going to have an instinct like that. But even right now, I think the question is, one of my big questions as I'm booking for my show is just, I want someone who has a perspective on this moment, who feels like they have had a thought that is about right now and who we are right now and what the story of America is right now.
I think what's really important is what Ezra said. It's about having something to say. We wanted to talk to you and talk together about how much we wanted to talk to you because we got something to say. Right. We wrote a 300-page book about how much we have to say. We love going on podcasts and television shows and radio and then doing live events to tell people what we have to say. We think this idea of abundance isn't just important for redefining what the American left means. We think that the outcome of thinking abundantly about housing and energy and science and technology is what politics is all about. It's about giving people the good life, and we think this is the path toward it. So certainly one thing that's profoundly motivated us is having something very concrete that we just want to get out there in the world. Like, my sense as a writer, as a thinker, is I want my software running on as many pieces of hardware as possible. I want to get my ideas out there as much as possible. And who gets credit for them and where the idea goes, and that's all secondary. I believe in ideas because they're important. And so I want to talk to people who have large platforms about those ideas, because how else does the idea get into the mainstream except through those large platforms? That's how broadcast technology works in the first place. So maybe one thing that you're touching on is a little bit of ideological ambiguity. Maybe a part of this is this sense that people don't know exactly what it is they have to say for 3 hours. All I can say for sure is that we know.
There's also a reality, and I mean, the book is trying to enter into this reality. I think one thing you're saying is that people have coded you. And so Donald Trump is really excited to do it, and maybe left-wing politicians are not. One thing that we think is that we're in a period of realignment. The last chapter of the book, we talk about an idea that is picked up from a historian named Gary Gerstle, which is the idea of political orders. And political orders are periods that have a sort of structure of consensus and a structure of a zone of conflict, but it's more or less agreed on by the two sides, even if only tacitly. So you have a New Deal order. New Deal order is founded by FDR. It is entrenched when Dwight Eisenhower accepts the New Deal as part of the U.S. proving that it can treat workers better than the Soviet Union. So those are sort of right there, the three ingredients typically of an order. You have a party that starts it, opposition party that accepts key premises, right? Dwight Eisenhower doesn't come in and say, we're going to roll back the whole New Deal. And it's often held in place by an external antagonist. In that case, the Soviet Union. You have in the 70s, stagflation, the Vietnam War, a series of problems that the New Deal order no longer seems able to handle. So you have the rise of what he calls the neoliberal order. And the neoliberal order is, if you're going to choose a founder, it's going to be Reagan on that one, right? It's much more about markets. It is very concerned with things like inflation. And it really is entrenched by Bill Clinton. You know, the era of big government is over. And partially, it's entrenched also by the fall of the Soviet Union, right? The fall of the Soviet Union is like this proof point that the sort of capitalists are right, that markets are the way of the future, government does not know what it's doing. And that becomes like the governing set of assumptions. And so there are arguments about what the markets should be doing, right? You know, Obamacare is about creating sort of markets in health insurance, right? You can use markets for very progressive ends. We want to use markets for lots of progressive ends. But the neoliberal order basically collapses amidst a financial crisis and climate change and China. And those are the three things that sort of Gerstle, but also separately we think kill it, which is the neoliberal order does not have an answer to the financial crisis, and it botches in many ways the answer to the financial crisis, puts too little demand into the economy, lets a sort of recession linger and a very slow recovery linger for too long. It doesn't know what to say really about climate change. Markets have made a lot of people rich by, you know, doing a lot of things that are very, very damaging for the environment, very damaging for the future of the human race potentially. And you have the rise of China. And the neoliberal order said, you integrate China into the global economy. You bring them into the WTO. You trade with them. You help them build their industrial base. You help them pull their people out of poverty, which that part is good. And they will become more like the West. They will liberalize. They will have a free press. They will, the richer we make China, the more China is going to become like us. And that proves totally wrong. Right? China becomes more authoritarian over time, but it also sort of develops an industrial base. It becomes, as it does not become more like us, becomes dangerous, you know, at least in our view, right? You don't want to ever have a conflict with another country who you've outsourced your key industrial base to. And so you have the sort of fall of that order. And then again, here, things that would have been ridiculous at one point in American politics suddenly become possible. Bernie Sanders is one of them, right? The idea that you would have somebody, a self-described socialist, running for president and coming anywhere near the Democratic nomination, that was unthinkable in 2004. And by 2016, it almost happened. And Donald Trump is another thing. Donald Trump runs like headlong into the failures of neoliberalism in the Republican Party. He runs against trade. He runs against a sort of Paul Ryan, more open to immigration. George W. Bush and John McCain were both very big on liberalizing immigration policy. He runs against the Iraq War and, sort of foreign adventurism. And there's a sort of isolationist instinct that coexists very awkwardly now within a territorial expansionist instinct, but at least to 2016, it was more isolationist. And so Donald Trump and his sort of reimagining of the Republican Party as a right-wing populist, more like sort of some Christian democratic parties in other countries, up in that quadrant of socially conservative, economically populist, that becomes something that's possible. But nothing has found an equilibrium. Right? Nobody's agreed to the other side's premises. There are certain ones that people are agreeing on. Both the Republican and Democratic parties have a very different view on China now. Right? Like Biden kept a lot of Trump's policies on China and actually strengthened them. And now Trump is building on that aggressively again. But in terms of the other things, there isn't agreement about what the next period in American politics should look like. And that's one reason I think it's very dangerous, both as a question of media strategy, but also as a question of politics, to code people, places, platforms too tightly. Republicans and Democrats aren't going to get along in Congress. That has to do with, I think, the incentives of Congress. My first book is called Why We're Polarized. It's about those almost hydraulic incentives for partisanship. But in terms of what is the meaning of my podcast, of Derek's, of yours, of Joe Rogan, of Theo Vaughn, of Call Her Daddy, of a million different places that are not well coded, that's, I think, very up for grabs. I mean, Elon Musk was an Obama-era liberal in 2012. I mean, I think his personal process of radicalization is not going to unwind itself. But a lot of the people who Democrats are like, all these billionaires are right-wing now. No, people are just uncertain. I mean, some of them are a little bit afraid, but people are uncertain. They're moving back and forth. The sort of texture of it is unsettled. And it's going to take time. These transitionary periods, I mean, they can go very badly too, but they take time. And I think people who are clinging to old certainties about what tells you which side folks are on, my sense is a lot of people who are very open to MAGA in 2025 are going to feel very differently about it in 2028. Depending on how they do, right? If they do great, then they're going to entrench. But if they don't, then a lot of people who became MAGA curious are not going to be MAGA curious anymore. But they're not going to want the last Democratic Party either. I was making this point to someone the other day about why the Democratic Party's embrace of the Liz Cheney style independent didn't work. Liz Cheney, of course, being Dick Cheney's daughter, a Republican, but what Liz Cheney, the Never Trumpers were a way of reaching out to who the Democratic Party thought the independents were. But the key thing about an independent to a political party is not that they don't like the other party. It's that they're an independent because they also don't like your party. And so finding a bunch of people who are meant to be messengers to them about why they shouldn't like the other party, it's fine. But what you need to do is explain why they should like your party. You need to have some message. You need to accept some fault. You need to think about what it was about you that drove them away. One of our deep views about politics right now, and not politics, policy, the texture of the economy of the country, is that the last period in American politics, in the economy, was about demand. The fundamental problem coming out of the financial crisis was demand. We had too little demand in the economy. Behind that too little demand in the economy was this other thing that was building up, which was a cost of living crisis. Housing was getting super expensive. Healthcare, in certain ways, energy, but energy is more complicated in ways we can talk about. Elder care, child care, higher education, right? This is a point. My wife is a journalist at The Atlantic, Annie Lowry with Derek. And she wrote this piece in 2020, early 2020, right before the pandemic, that went very viral, called The Affordability Crisis. And it sticks in my head because she's writing at a time when people were saying the economy's great. Everything's great. Like, you looked at measures of consumer confidence in 2020, February of 2020, terrific. She's like, so how come if the economy's so great, everybody I talk to is so upset? And she's like, look, people are making more money than ever, but it's getting eaten up and eaten up and eaten up by these things they really need that keep getting more expensive even as consumer goods get cheaper. Then the pandemic hits, the problem becomes COVID. But then you have inflation. And inflation moves the problem of the economy, the fundamental problem everybody's paying attention to, from the demand side, how do we get more people at work? How do we get them to spend more money? To the supply side, we don't have enough. right? We have a constriction of semiconductors, of used cars, and then eventually everything, right? Everything is getting more expensive. And we do get, I mean, we'll see what happens with tariffs. We do get, by 2024, the rate of inflation under control, but prices are still much higher. And now people are paying real attention to prices. And the affordability crisis, which again is a cost of living crisis, which had been growing for a very long time, is now at crisis levels. And it becomes the substance of politics. People, you had all these Democrats saying, I don't know what the problem is. Like inflation has come down to whatever it was, 3 to 4% in 2024. And they're right about that. But one, the price level of everything remained high. But two, people were now like, the fuck is housing so expensive for? Like, I'm never going to be able to afford a home. Like, my parents went to public university debt-free. I could never do that. And what we've done is fail. I mean, Democrats in this case, Republicans haven't done that great on it either. But in blue states, Democrats have failed on cost of living. The reason California, Illinois, New York are losing hundreds of thousands of people to Florida, Texas, Arizona, Colorado is that they've failed on cost of living. It is too expensive to live there. And the reason they failed at cost of living is supply. They did not make enough. They actually made it too hard in many cases to make enough of the things people needed. Some of those are straightforward, like we didn't let people build enough homes. Some of them are more like we've made it too expensive to build public infrastructure like high-speed rail or the Second Avenue subway. Some of it has to do, I think, in the long run with innovation and the relationship between Democrats and technology. But one of our views is that there are other things in politics that will matter too. But we are in a period where the cost of living, supply, affordability is the fundamental economic question. Donald Trump himself has said he won because of the price of groceries. He's got this very funny quote where he's like, nobody said, I don't have a Donald Trump impression, but he's like, nobody ever used the word groceries in politics before I did. Well, it'd be good if he then wasn't making it more expensive. But Democrats believe his weakness is cost of living. They're probably right, but they don't have a strength on it. And the key question our book is trying to refocus politics on is how do we make more of what we need? How does the government either organize itself or organize markets to create more of what we need? And how do we admit, as liberals, times when we've made it so the government makes it too hard to make more of what we need? I'll say one last thing in this pretty long answer. I thought one of the most important things that has come out recently is a piece in Foreign Affairs by Brian Deese, who's a former head of Joe Biden's National Economics Council. And Deese helped negotiate every major bill Biden passed. It's a very straightforward piece about what it is Democrats have not done to make it possible to build at the level of their goals. And he says things like, we should just remove federal funding from cities that have highly restrictive home zoning codes. He says we should have a goal for how much nuclear we build in the next 10 years. We should be trying to reach a goal of new nuclear capacity. It's a very, very important piece because Deese is right at the center of Democratic policy. Instead of retrenching, he's like, okay, we didn't get there. What do we do now to make it possible to get to the place we promised you we can go?